Tonight on Free Minds TV, Free Ward Bird, we'll be talking about that. We'll also be discussing how the former drug czar in the United Kingdom is saying that all drugs should be legalized. We'll be talking about Festivus, plus a whole lot more, tonight on Free Minds TV.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 187 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is our holiday episode, and it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Recording this, I think it's set to start airing the Christmas Eve, somewhere around then.
So and currently it's Festivus Eve. We'll be talking about Festivus
That is
tonight.
true. When we're recording this, we are talking about Festivus.
I don't think we're going to be doing an airing of grievances on the air, though, are we?
I was hoping for a feats of strength at the very least, Nick. But we'll be getting into that in the latter part of the show.
You'd win.
Oh, yeah, we'll see. We'll be getting into that in the latter part of the show. But first, I want to talk about a couple of different things. We are going to getting into the Free Ward Bird. If you're from New Hampshire, anyone who follows the liberty movement here or cares about property rights, gun rights, anything like that, you probably know who Ward Bird is.
Well, yeah, this is a story that's really in the public eye. It's not just an activist story.
Right. And so we'll be getting into that. If you aren't familiar with it, definitely stay tuned for that. It is something that's extremely important, affects anyone who owns property, believes in the Second Amendment rights and the right to defend their property. I think that's very important for people to understand that. But first, I want to talk about something else that affects all of us, and that's the war on drugs. Whether you are someone who's been affected by a family member going away to jail, yourself have been affected by this, by being punished for having a drug habit or something rather than treating it like a medical issue. All around the country, all around the world, people are treated as criminals for addictions, for using substances that governments say are illegal. Alcohol, cigarettes, depending on where you are, those are fine. The drugs of choice that government officials and people in nice suits decide people can have are just fine.
More expensive suits than we wear.
Yes, exactly. People who choose different drugs of choice, though, well, those are criminals. If they get addicted, they should be thrown into prison behind bars, and it's what's created more prisoners behind bars in the United States than any other country in the world, because we have a great war on drugs going on here, and it's really worked wonders. No more drugs on the streets here, of course. Other countries, though, they're having a different approach to it, or at least some of the top officials are.
Right, and beyond criminalizing a lifestyle choice and punishing people basically because you don't like the way they lead their lives, which doesn't seem like the role of government in a country where you're supposed to be free people. Beyond that, it's really just not effective at ending the problem of drug addiction. As you pointed out, Toby, sarcastically, we don't have a drug-free society here in the United States, and we're not much closer than countries that take a much more treatment-focused approach. Drugs are illegal just about anywhere you go in the world. It's sort of, there's been norming of the drug laws through agencies like the UN, and a lot of that has happened under US pressure. But in many places, users are treated much less like criminals and much more like people who have a health problem or a mental health problem. They're not thrown in prison cells.
Well, that's what they have, Nick. It makes perfect sense to treat them that way, but...
Well, I mean, drug addiction is largely, I mean, when you're getting into problems of it...
brain chemistry.
Right, it's brain chemistry, and a lot of times, problem drug use is touched off by emotional problems, or people have... Most people start drinking heavily or using drugs because they don't feel good.
They're self-medicating, you know, Nick. And so, I mean, there was a time in this country's history where we treated people with schizophrenia, for example, or depression, or all sorts of mental disorders, mental disabilities. We would throw them in an insane asylum and treat them worse than we would ever treat an animal. And nowadays, we look back on those times and we create documentaries about them so that it'll never happen again, because it's sick and it's disgusting to look back on this country's history. Yet, we're doing something even worse to people who are addicted to drugs. And how people aren't making that connection,
well, they're not all
addicted.
Just
baffles my mind.
That's the other thing.
Well, a lot of them are.
A lot of them are. I mean, you probably have to use drugs and possess them a fair amount of the time. You know, you're not likely
Before you
to
get caught? No one gets busted their first time.
No one gets busted their first time. But that doesn't mean that everybody that gets busted is a drug addict either.
Well, some of them are selling drugs and making money off the lucrative market, just like they did in Prohibition. I mean, of course, yes, black markets come with huge profit motives and get very bad people involved, which is another symptom of the problem that we have of throwing addicts in prison.
And I think we're starting to see this debate actually shift a little bit. I think at least on the issue of marijuana in the United States, the general public has come a long way seeing that the war on drugs, which is largely in the United States a war on marijuana, it's well over half the drug arrests, most of the funding. I think it's more like 70, 80, 90% of the resources in the drug war go to fighting marijuana. And so when you're talking about these hard drugs, they're actually a very small amount of the resources are actually devoted to fighting meth or crack or cocaine. But I don't think that's going quite far enough, because fundamentally the issue is the same, whether the substance is alcohol or marijuana or heroin. The issue that you're talking about is whether you should be criminalizing people having a drug habit, and I don't think you should. And somebody over in the UK who actually held high office agrees with us. All illicit substances, including heroin and cocaine, should be legalized, according to a former United Kingdom drugs minister who on Thursday became the most senior politician to push for a dramatic change in the strategy for dealing with drug enforcement in Britain. Former Home Office Minister Bob Ainsworth said that it is better for addicts to receive their fixes on prescription rather than allowing international criminal gangs to make billions in profits for supplying them, reports Nigel Morris at The Independent. So this is not, he's coming right out and saying that all drugs, even the nasty ones, should be legal.
Right.
And if you do that, you take the money out of the hands of the cartels, out of the hands of people like, they reference opium growers. I guess part of Ainsworth's jobs was he was sent to Afghanistan to help the counter-drug efforts there. And I think that's probably where he realized that it was a futile effort.
Yeah,
but you would take the
anything.
money out of the hands of groups like the Taliban that do get some of the funding from that, and criminal drug gangs, the drug cartels in Mexico. This is how these criminals make their money. They wouldn't be making money off drugs anymore if there was a legal channel to get your drugs.
Not only that, but it would also make the drugs much healthier for the end user. Let's take a horrible drug, methamphetamine for an example. It does horrible damage, long-term permanent damage to the brain. Look at a brain scan of someone who has done a significant amount of methamphetamine, and it looks like there's holes in the brain. Those aren't actually holes. It's inactivity where spots of the brain just aren't working anymore. Well, what studies have shown those holes come from is not from the methamphetamine itself, but more from the impurities that it's mixed from, the chemical process and the gross stuff that these drug cartels use to make the drug itself. If you had it being made by companies and legitimate entities out there instead of these sick cartels, it would be much less harmful to the end user, so that when they do decide to kick the habit and want to live a normal life, they would still have part of their brain left to live a normal life, rather than having a mush brain and having a huge old prison sentence and living the rest of their life on the street or in a jail cell. So if we're looking at countries that have dabbled in this area, let's take Portugal, for example. I don't know why it doesn't get more press attention. We've talked about it many times. Back in 2001, they decriminalized small amounts of all drugs across the board. What happened? Did people suddenly go into the streets and all start doing drugs? They're decriminalized, right? You're no longer going to be sent to prison or have an arrest record if you're trying cocaine, heroin, meth. So people must have been doing that, right? Well, no. We saw the opposite effect. Well, we've seen the numbers since Portugal decided to decriminalize small amounts of all drugs are reductions by over 50 to 100% with drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. Just because they're decriminalized doesn't make people want to use them. If we look at our own country's drug war history, ever since we really started a war on drugs some 40 plus years ago, drug usage has skyrocketed. New drugs have come onto the market. Crack, crystal meth, arguably wouldn't have even existed if it wasn't for cracking down on the substances like cocaine, just like we saw with alcohol prohibition. What happened when beer suddenly became illegal? Well, a lot of people have turned to harder alcohols, the vodkas, the bourbons of the world, because, well, it's smaller, easier to smuggle, etc., more profit in it than, say, beer. And still, our country hasn't kicked the habit of hard booze way back from the Prohibition era.
There's been some reduction. I mean, gradually over time since the end of Prohibition.
But looking at compared to other countries,
right? Countries that never had a prohibition, their hard alcohol consumption rates, their liquor consumption rates, are still lower than the U.S. Even all these decades, getting up close to, we're going to most likely see the 1 century anniversary of Prohibition coming into place. So it does have a long-lasting effect, and these problems aren't going to get better overnight. But I do think doing away with the war on drugs is actually one of the best ways to reduce the harm that drugs are doing to society. What harm reduction have we seen with the Prohibition war on drugs approach that's been taken by the United States? Billions of dollars spent, many, many thousands of lives ruined that didn't have to be ruined. I mean, a drug addiction is bad enough. You can get over a drug addiction, but it's much harder to get over a conviction.
Right. I mean you get arrested for, say, marijuana. Then how do you get a job after you get out of that? No one wants to hire you.
It can be a downward spiral.
Right. And so, well, what am I going to do now? Well, I might as well start selling marijuana. Well, that's not making enough money. What else can I sell? Cocaine? Okay, there's a huge profit motive in that. And so guess what? You arrested someone for experimenting with marijuana. Now you just made a cocaine dealer. Good for you, war on drugs. I mean, there's unintended consequences from the drug war. If you don't believe us saying it, yeah, we're just a couple of young guys, what do we know? Well, I suggest people go to leap.cc, leap.cc. That's Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. This is made up of thousands of judges, lawyers, police officers, prison guards from around the country, and I think there's some international ones on there too. I'm not sure now. But anyways, there's testimonies from people who have been on the front lines in the DEA, who have been sentencing people to life in prison for mere possession of cocaine. And now they're seeing, wow, I did not do a thing to help society. In fact, I just ruined people's lives. And now they're speaking out against it and trying to correct some of the wrong they're doing. So if you don't believe us, I suggest leap.cc, leap.cc.
And the real interesting thing about this is essentially a case where you have, this guy was a minister in charge of drugs policy in the UK. So what he did was very similar to the step that many officers, judges, and other people who work in the criminal justice system have taken when they've gotten involved with LEAP. Because he was done. He's not currently serving. He was done with his career, and that's allowed him to speak out. And I'm going to point out here, I think they're a lot further along in this debate over in the UK. One area where they're actually doing better than we are here in the US is in terms of drug policy. But Ainsworth actually called in the House of Commons. This wasn't just a statement he made to a newspaper. He actually made statements in the House of Commons for a fundamental rethink of how the country responds to drug addiction. And he received the backing of senior MPs, basically our equivalent of Congress people, of all parties who argue that the current tough policy on drugs is counterproductive. So I think it's very powerful when you have somebody like this who has worked in the criminal justice system, has been a soldier working against drugs in the war on drugs, who realizes that it's not working. And I think most people who give you an honest assessment will tell you the war on drugs will never work. Right. Well, it'll never do what they claim it'll do. It'll never eliminate drugs.
Our major issue, though, here, Nick, is we have such an opposition. We've got not only the huge profit motives from drug dealers out there who actively oppose such things. I mean, who wants drug laws more than anyone? Drug dealers. That's how they make their billions of dollars in profits. And who else does? Well, how about the law enforcement side? Who do you always see coming and testifying on the clock, mind you, with your tax dollars against petitions to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, for example? Well, it's the police officers union. It's people who own prisons.
Likes to do it too.
I mean, it's people who make money off throwing your friends, your neighbors, your family members in jail for choosing to use a different drug than you may use. I mean, we don't want to go back to alcohol prohibition. Most thinking people know that's a bad idea. Why is it different for any other substance? I don't know. We do need to move on, Nick. I would love to hear people's thoughts on this. I've never heard a coherent argument for why we need to keep drugs illegal. Never heard
a coherent argument? No, I've heard lots of arguments.
I've heard lots of arguments, but it usually just spirals into some kind of an emotional argument. Right. Never heard something that...
Drugs are very bad.
Yeah, I know, drugs are bad. Don't think, drugs are bad. Alcohol is bad. Cigarettes are bad. We're not saying...
They really are, yeah.
Yeah, very bad for you. We're not promoting drug use. What we're promoting here is a healthy society. What we're promoting here is free choice. Anyway, so I'd love to hear from you. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org. For now, though, we do need to move on, Nick. We've got to get into another controversial subject, and that's free Ward Bird. Well, if you're anyone who loves freedom, liberty, property rights, I don't think it's that controversial. In fact, there is now a petition with 117 signatures from state representatives from around New Hampshire that are asking the governors and the executive council to grant Ward Bird a pardon and free him from prison. Now, why is he in prison? Let's get some backstory for the people who have not been paying attention to this case. Well, Ward Bird from New Hampshire was sentenced to 3 years behind bars for criminal threatening because, well, when he was on his property one day, there was a lost hiker, and she, I don't have the original story in here, so I'm paraphrasing the different reports that I've read on WMUR. She came across his property, and he asked her to leave, and he had a gun in his hand, and, well, push came to shove, and he was arrested for criminal threatening. He's claiming he never pointed the gun at her. She's claiming he pointed the gun at him. Regardless, though, she's on his property, asked her to leave, didn't leave. What's the problem? He didn't shoot her.
Right.
It's his property. Isn't that?
Once you give somebody fair warning, I mean, there are limits. I mean, just because somebody's trespassing in New Hampshire, as the law is written, you can't just shoot somebody.
No, he didn't shoot her.
Right, right. That's what I'm saying. Had he shot her,
right,
then it would be
that's
a different
what we're
story.
talking about.
Had he shot at her, it would
no,
have been a different
story. Didn't do that.
Simply brandishing a gun, it's your property. If you tell somebody to leave once and then you pull out a gun and say, you might want to leave now, if they don't leave, you know, that's almost reason enough to shoot them.
But anybody who do that.
Anybody who stands on somebody else's property, doesn't leave when they're told to leave, and then has a gun pulled on them and still doesn't leave, to me it seems like they're willing to make it a life or death issue, the trespassing issue on your property. And that's usually something, like, I don't know if this woman was crazy, probably just some loco person. But most of the time, if you pull a gun on somebody and tell them they better leave, and they don't leave, they're either crazy and therefore dangerous, or they have weapons and ill intent themselves and are therefore dangerous. So in many states, he could have shot her dead, and I don't think I wouldn't have liked to have seen that happen.
No,
but,
of course not. But
I could understand had that happened.
Wait, but
going to prison simply for saying,
mean,
get off my property?
Does this mean that you can't defend your property from trespassers? Even
yeah, pretty much. They'd rather you not. Some people would rather you not.
So I own property. Someone comes on it. I want them to leave. I can't say, get off my property now. Why? It's my property. You're on it. You're trespassing. I want you to leave.
Yeah. And
now leave.
The whole idea of calling the police, I mean, the only reason the police exist, in theory, in the United States anyway, you know, in other countries they might have different theories, but the idea of having the police around is so that they can protect your property because and your life and liberty because you have a right to those things. It doesn't mean you have to call the police to do those things if you don't have recourse to them immediately. If you have a trespasser who's actively trespassing, you've told him to leave nicely, relatively nicely, and then then you have every right to pull a gun. What are you doing by calling the police? You're essentially calling guys with guns to come and essentially threaten that person to leave with the same tool. But why call somebody else to come with a gun and tell this woman to get off your property if you've got a gun right there and she's trespassing right now? It's going to take the cops a while to get there.
Yeah. And I do want to note here that we are talking about what we think you should be able to do, but Ward Bird does maintain his innocence. He's saying that he did brandish the gun, but he's all about gun safety. He claims he did not point it at her, and he simply showed her the gun and asked her to leave. Didn't even point at it at her. So it just seems to me, it rubs me wrong. It makes me question what kind of property rights you have now if this is, you get sentenced for 3 years for jail, even if you did pointed at him. He's saying he didn't. It's her word against his. It rubs me wrong. I am glad about the outpouring of support that he's gotten, though. There have been mass demonstrations with hundreds of people showing up. 117 signatures from state representatives. We've got 400 of them here, so over a fourth of them signed this petition. And I guess we're going to just be waiting on the executive council to grant him a pardon. And the Governor Lynch here. Hopefully they'll do that. it seems crazy to me. I mean, this guy is someone,
He's
a
sort of
pillar
like-
in the community is what people were considering him. I mean, I think he was a Boy Scout leader. He was an all-around, like, community guy.
He was protecting his property, and the idea that you go to prison for that in this day and age, when they don't arrest the trespasser.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
This is criminal trespass, which, I mean,
Nope, it's criminal threatening on your part. You threatened the trespasser. What? Yeah, they were trespassing. God, what is this?
I don't know.
Oh, I don't.
I don't know.
That's frustrating. Anyways, Nick, we do need to move on. We've got to get into the internet and taxing the internet. The government always wants its fingers in there, and I do want to note.
They do love taxes.
We are going to note here, Nick, we are going to be talking about net neutrality. The FCC is ruling the government, now regulating the internet, getting their fingers in there. They've been trying for years to do it. Now they've done it. We are going to be addressing that on this week's television, on this week's Free Minds Radio this Sunday. I think it'll be the day after Christmas, the 26th. So if you want to see our take on that, or listen to our take on that, I guess you could watch on the webcam.
It's not open that day.
It's not open that day.
No, I meant to get to you on that.
No, well, I guess we'll be doing it
next
the following week. We'll be doing it the following week on the radio show.
Early January.
The point is, we want to get people's feedback on it. We want to get phone calls about it. So we're going to be covering that on the radio side. So listen to the next episode of Free Minds Radio for that one. But we do need to get into another area on the internet where the government wants to get its fingers. This isn't the FCC like they've gotten with this net neutrality. What this is talking about is taxes.
Taxes.
Money.
And if they don't want to regulate something, they want to tax it. So this is going to the state of Illinois. Many Illinois taxpayers, or as the article here calls them, Illinoisans? It's not Illinoisians, it's Illinoisans. I guess that's right. Most Illinois taxpayers are dodging state and local taxes by buying Christmas gifts online. Now, a lot of people might not even, if you don't really think about it too much, you might not even realize you're doing this. You go onto Amazon, you buy some gifts. You might assume, if you're from a state where there is sales tax, here in New Hampshire we don't have one. But if you're from a state that does have sales tax, I think a lot of people assume that the price they're actually charged is just, it includes tax, right? Because they'll show you the price and then they add tax on afterwards, but if you're used to just the taxes are included, you just assume that. You're not necessarily going to look for the line item that says taxes. Some people might be doing it consciously, but I doubt everyone is. But when you buy the Christmas gifts online, states like Illinois that have sales taxes don't get that revenue that they so desperately want. The state hopes to get them to eventually pay those taxes in 2011. Apparently, the state of Illinois will offer a sales tax amnesty from January 1st through October 15th. So that's like most of the year. Under legislation passed last year, so basically you'll be able to pay after the fact, even if you didn't pay before.
No penalties.
Right.
It's a penalty-free amnesty where if you go back from 2004 and pay all the money you got away with,
right,
you won't have to pay penalties.
Right. It's going to cover all sales tax between June 20th, 2004 and the end of 2010. If you do a lot of shopping online, and I don't know what the tax rate is in Illinois, I assume it's pretty high, you could be talking thousands of dollars. Seriously, thousands of dollars. And they can pay without penalty during that period. Yada, yada, yada. It's interesting to note here that the retailers online, they're under no requirement to actually charge these people state sales tax.
Yet. There's definitely legislation in the works to allow them, to force retailers to do this.
There's legislation in the works, but there's actually...
Not yet. There isn't legislation.
But there is, and there's constitutional hurdles to that too.
Oh, God, yeah, that matters. Right. Constitutional hurdles.
Well, okay, well,
yeah.
it matters really less than ever, unfortunately. But back in '92, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a state cannot require retailers without a physical presence, so unless they actually have a store, or you could probably count a warehouse too, but unless they actually have a physical location in that state, they cannot require those retailers to assess sales tax on purchases because you're out of their jurisdiction. So basically the burden falls upon the person purchasing whatever it is on Amazon or eBay or whatever website it is. And so far, Congress has declined to pass a law requiring the taxes be collected.
Thus far. But
and I think there's some constitutional issues.
There's billions of dollars. It doesn't matter, Nick. These politicians don't care about the Constitution. Yeah, it's a hurdle. That's all it is. All it means they need to run a little bit faster before jumping it. That's all it means. They need to have some fancy, dancy language to say why we're breaching the Constitution.
On the upside here, the one thing that may have prevented this from passing in the past is that what real incentive does Congress have to make sure that the states get their sales tax money?
Well,
because we're talking about the states here want Congress to pass a law, but Congress doesn't see any more money because at least up until this point, there's no national sales tax.
So maybe
they're talking about that.
They'll do
when
it, but they get 1%.
Tax,
Here's a way. Here's a lawmaker, Nick. Okay, we'll pass this law, but every internet sale, we get 1% because we're the federal government and we say so. Anyways, I like the free internet. I don't like the government getting its dirty fingers in there. It makes me feel icky. It's the one place that, well, it used to be free, and the government's definitely getting in there. The UN, too, actually. They want some internet control anyways. Anyways, we're out of time with this. We'll be talking about the internet more on the next episode of Free Minds Radio. Did want to get into this final article. It's Festivus Eve. Tomorrow is the day where we put up that big old shiny tin pole aluminum pole, I'm sorry, and have the errands of grievances where we all talk about why we're all upset with each other and what we were so upset about the year before, and followed by the feats of strength where the son wrestles the father. And I think that's a very important time of the year to be celebrating. If anyone's a Seinfeld fan, they'll appreciate this. Inmate gets special meals as an adherent to Festivus. This coming from California, an Orange County inmate who disliked salami got special meals after declaring his religious belief in the Festivus holiday celebrated on the television show Seinfeld. The Orange County Register reports on Monday that the 38-year-old convicted drug dealer, Malcolm Amaro King, asked for kosher meals in order to maintain his healthy physique. But the sheriff's officials reserve kosher meals for inmates with religious beliefs. Well, Judge Derek G. Johnson demanded religious reason for King to get such meals, and his lawyer, Fred cited the client's devotion to Festivus as a holiday celebrated on Seinfeld with an aluminum pole and the errands of grievances. Well, the sheriff's department spokesman said Ryan Burrisk says King got his salami-free meals for 2 months before a county court got an order to throw out the previous ruling. So I guess he no longer gets his salami meals.
Not even on Festivus?
Not even on Festivus. Not even tomorrow. I guess he'll be eating salami. So no more healthy physique for Mr. King. You know what I say, Nick? It's all fairy tales and make-believe. Who cares if it's the flying spaghetti monster
right.
or a Jeebus Christ?
You know, actually, I know people in the real world who celebrate Festivus. So it's not just
spaghetti
from a TV
flying
show.
Monster. Santa Claus, he's like a god to some people, right?
Yeah.
Jeebus, whatever it is. Everybody's got their hokey pokey out there. I've got mine, you've got yours, you've got yours. We all know it's make-believe, right? Oh, I've really angered some. I don't really care either way, folks. Out of time, freemindstv.com. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.
Happy Festivus.
Happy Festivus. And Christmas and Hanukkah and stuff like that.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.